The ancient wars of the Imass and the Jaghut saw the world torn asunder. Vast armies contended on the ravaged lands. The dead piled high, their bone, the bones of hills, their spilled blood, the blood of seas. Sorceries raged until the sky itself was fire.
Welcome back to another Malazan Book of the Fallen video. This is the Memories of Ice Prologue, a new season of episodes for this book, and I couldn't be more excited. Let's get into it. Let's do some housekeeping. First and foremost, you can see that we're not in our normal setting. We're in a measure to try and keep sanity throughout this crisis and not have our kids drive us absolutely up the wall. We're on a big road trip, so this is the first episode we're recording from the RV. There's no fancy backgrounds or books around or anything like that. It's just a dude in his trailer talking about Malazan. As always, with Memories of Ice, we're going to carry on doing the same exact thing, which is to hit you with the chapter summary, analysis, kind of reaction, and then during the second half of the video, I'll let the newbies know when to bounce out so that we can reminisce on all the spoilery goodness. The other thing I should say is that this one includes the dope chapter poem introductions from I Am Electric Man, and we're going to keep those going through the whole book. We're also going to release those for free somehow, probably in the Discord, as like a whole audio book called like Poems of the Malazan Book of the Fallen or something like that, or Malazan Poems of the Fallen or something, because he just does such a great job. Stick around till the end. We have another one that kind of introduces book one before we dive into chapters 1 and 2 next week. But this is arguably one of the best books in the entire series, and so even though it's not like my personal favorite, I do love it a ton and am excited to get into it. Erickson actually describes this as like kind of closing out the first trilogy, like Gardens of the Moon, Deadhouse Gates, and Memories of Ice are kind of like a trilogy, and then House of Chains and Midnight Tides go back and are kind of prequel stories to some of the characters that we get introduced to throughout these first three. The prologue of Memories of Ice, though, is super deep and just chocked full of like clues and foreshadowing and layers of stuff that's going to become important throughout all of the books. A lot of lore, a lot of backstory, a lot of like world building and history happens in Memories of Ice too, and you get to explore a lot of those ancient races. So you just get the world, you know, a lot of the details get filled in, I guess, in Memories of Ice, which is a cool part of the book too. But even more so than that is that it introduces and fleshes out like some of the best characters, not just in Memories of Ice or the first three books, but of the entire series, like total favorites, Gruntle, Stani Manakis. You get to see the necromancers, right? Bauchelain and Korbal Broach get introduced in this one to most people who don't come in through the novellas. You've got the Mott Irregulars. You get to meet a lot more bridge burners than we saw back in Gardens of the Moon, and just a ton more. So, like, for me, I want to just use this first episode to go through the prologue only and really just hype up the book, because, again, even though it's not my personal favorite, it's super dope and just so many awesome moments, characters, plot lines, all that good stuff. So, it's going to be lit.
It's good. It's real good.
So the prologue opens up like 298,600 and something years before Burn Sleep. We're in like 1100 and something. We in the main book series, but that means it's basically about like 300,000 years in the past. You're kind of in the perspective of this Imass bonecaster Pran Cole, who's looking out, basically surveying the results of their long war with the Jaghut. They've essentially freed a continent from Jaghut control. It was covered in glaciers, basically, which have since melted, created this big kind of, inland lake, essentially, that is now draining off and will soon be, I guess, empty, and more or less everything is kind of going back to normal, like Mother Earth is restoring itself after all this abuse from these kind of centuries-long wars that they've been doing. As this lake's kind of like melting, he sees this like scene in front of him, which is like a pack of renag, which I assume are like wildebeest or buffalo or something like that, which it got stuck in the mud, and then there was a pack of wolves chasing them. They also got stuck in the mud and basically just died in this kind of like quicksand, silty result of this lake going down. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, Mother Nature does for both the hunter and the hunted alike, which is relevant for Pran Cole, who sees it as kind of symbolic or a metaphor for them, who are chasing down this last Jaghut family on the continent and trying to take them down. Meanwhile, all this stuff is happening with Mother Nature. Their lake is disappearing. They have, an ever-increasing population base that they need to fight this war, which, creates this huge need for resources that's always growing, and so just devastating the land, and it becomes this cycle of constant self-inflicted wounds, basically, where you're, cutting off your nose to spite your face, basically, in the sense of waging this war and creating this need for resources that can then never be met. And so that's this theme of kind of like futility and conquest, and how kind of that's all interrelated, or I think Erickson calls it imperialism or colonialism and stuff like that. But, we see that touched on many times, not just getting set up in this book, but obviously if you go back to Gardens of the Moon, Toole's famous quote about everything being futile, because, again, you can see that 300,000 years later, this thing is still going on. Also, just as a total aside, and I don't think this is spoilery really, but I don't know if you picked up on it, that this is that same Bonecaster who shows up in Krupp's dream all the way back in Gardens of the Moon and helps take the kind of Tattersail, Night Chill, spawn and put it into the Mybi that ultimately ends up becoming Silver Fox. A lot of threads to keep track of. But Pran Cole sees this, and he's basically reflecting on how their arrogance ultimately led them to this kind of vicious cycle of constant war, but they justify it as necessary to conquer their enemy, the Jaghut. And then it's so funny, too, because, like, the war leader comes up, and he's like, did you see any signs in this stuff? Did you see any symbols? Or he goes like, damn it, I wish you would have seen some omens or something like that. But yeah, and then they just ultimately resume their hunt for this Jaghut family. He also mentions sensing some kind of a unattached, another Bonecaster out there. Then we go to the actual Jaghut family, right? Or to the Jaghut, and it is a family. It's a mother and the two kids, and she's dying a slow death just because there's constant battles that they're having with these Imass that are tailing them and trying to wipe them out. They're taking their time about it. We learn they're the last ones left on this entire continent. And actually, we get some really cool backstory, because what she says is that she showed up on Genabacchus in order to help Chain Raced, who was the Jaghut tyrant who gets released in Gardens of the Moon. And so they kind of had a temporary truce, the Imass and all the Jaghut, who came together to enslave Raced, who was trying to assert dominance and control over everyone. And that was kind of how they all got together. And then as soon as that was accomplished, the Imass basically started up trying to take them all down again. And that's how they find themselves the very last ones left on this continent, with the Imass in hot pursuit, ready to basically finish the job.
That's cold-blooded.
As she's like clawing her way up the riverbank, we get this Bonecaster that's obviously the one Pran Cole was alluding to, is on her own. She's wearing a panther skin. She's obviously a recent mother herself. You could tell that from her physical characteristics, but she offers the Jaghut a deal. She basically says, look, I'll take the kids in exchange for something, and doesn't say exactly explicitly what it is in that moment, but she takes the kids from her, and there's like a moment there of compassion, right, where she kind of feels for the plight of this Jaghut and their kids, and so she takes the kids with her to where this warren used to be, and it's basically still there as this kind of like wound, and she doesn't know. She kind of probes it. She can't sense exactly what it is, but she judging by the ruins that are there, which is a single tower, looks Jaghut built, she assumes that it's Amtos Falak, and so she thinks it's kind of this warren that will take them back to their kind of homeland of Amtos Falak, where there will be other Jaghut who can maybe care for these kids. She's not totally sure, and she doesn't go to like, incredible lengths to try and find out, and just decides that will be better than giving him up to her own kin, basically, and puts him through this gateway.
Good luck, happy dance. Good luck, happy dance.
Good luck, happy dance.
We go back to the riverbank, and that's when Pran Cole and his crew of Imass have finally caught up to the mom. The mom is like satisfied and says that her kids are out of their reach now, and she's surprised that there was any compassion. She didn't know that the Imass had compassion. She was surprised that there was this bone caster out there who was willing to take her kids from her and help to save them from this pain. Unfortunately, Pran Cole kind of ruins the moment because he calls the portal not a gateway, but a rent, and this rent is in Morn, and he's like, yo, we gotta bug out super quick and get there because this other bonecaster's about to commit a crazy atrocity. They roll up on her at this rift at the rent in Morn, and it's already too late. She tells him that her name is Kalava, and he's like, yo, you stupid idiot, that was not Amtos Falak. He was like, that was a rent or like a wound into another warren, and he's like, there was something like a soul basically being used to seal the wound into that warren, and now that you just chuck those kids in there, couple things have happened. A, those kids are screwed, and their souls are the ones now being used to like seal up that wound into that warren, and B, whatever was being used for that beforehand has now been set free.
Oops, my bad.
He's like, you really screwed everything up, and those kids for sure. And she's like, oh my god, that sucks, I feel so bad. He's like, but look, if you want to sort it out, he's like, you're welcome to jump in there and you can use your soul to seal it, and they'll be free to. When he tells her that, she's like, yeah, sucks for them. Then they start to talk about what actually got freed, and he's like, I don't know, but I think we have a long time to find out, because I actually had this dream where I saw ourselves 300,000 years in the future, all desiccated, and I know that we're about to go forward with this ritual, and that ultimately they're going through this whole ritual of Talon in order to be able to just continue this never-ending war and kind of circumvent that need for ongoing resources and stuff by just becoming undead zombies. Then they don't need to eat and do all that stuff, and they don't lose warriors to casualty and fatality and all of that stuff. And so again, just this constant, war mentality driving them to these extraordinary lengths, both in terms of decimating the environment that they lived in and to the point where it could no longer sustain them, and then going to the next extreme of becoming undead zombies, all for that greater good of stamping out the enemy. Kalava's whole take on this is like, y'all are psycho, and so even though she's obviously no angel herself, she's like, you guys are tripping in this ongoing, never-ending war. We get a lot of dope backstory from her that she's actually Tool's sister, right? And that they were all of this one Imass clan. He was the first sword of that clan, so like the head warrior G'd up dude, and that's why he was kind of like this unattached person back in Gardens of the Moon. The reason why he was unattached was because Kalava did not want to go through this ritual that they're all about to do, and so in order to become like unbound, she essentially murdered every single person in her own clan to be able to free herself from having to go through this ritual. So yeah, Kalava. And that's why I say, you don't want to root for Kalava too hard for saving these two Jaghut kids at the beginning. Plus, it was really more like saving. And this is one of those cases, I think, where you can definitely say intent is less important than consequence. And then at the end of this whole interaction, we get Pran Cole telling her that he thinks what ultimately ends up getting freed from that rent was a K'chain Shemal. And that even though there was a Jaghut tower there, it was built on the ruins of one of these K'chain cities, whatever the hell that means.
Idea what is going on right now.
Then we're going to jump forward about 170,000 years. So we're still about 120-ish thousand years before our time, quote unquote, the time of the main books. We're on Korbal, which is one of these old continents whose names I'm going to continue to butcher throughout this series of videos. And we're basically seeing the aftermath, if you will, of the fall, right? And so ultimately a god has been pulled down out of the sky and kind of created this mass casualty event. It's like almost like an asteroid hitting is kind of how I picture it in my brain. But one where like the chunks of asteroid also create all kinds of crazy disease and famine and plague and strife and civil unrest. And basically you're all around kind of a medieval Mad Max type of post-apocalyptic environment. Walking through all of this ruin and chaos and death and destruction is Krull, the elder god who we met back in Gardens of the Moon, who was just kind of taking in all of the consequence of the fall of this god being called down. We don't know much about who summoned this god down from another world or universe or whatever. We do know that they're basically all dead and gone, that they were kind of taken out by their own self-inflicted wound of calling this thing down. And we know kind of how they did it, or at least the basics of it, right? Which is that they opened up a portal to some kind of an alien world or universe, or however they did it, lured over this kind of god who was in that world, and they wanted to use his power. And so they kind of piqued his curiosity and then tried to harness it. And it came crashing down, trailing all this death and destruction. All of these maggots turned into black stuff that flew away and is now out there. And in addition to knowing kind of what they did, we know what their purpose was. And that was just purely to defeat a single man. Damn! And this, again, is critical backstory, not just for what's going to happen in the plot of these books, but for the entire series as a whole, because we find out that, alongside the first empire of humans, there was also another empire that was rising right alongside it on the continent of Jakuruku. And it was all built around this one, warrior of basically unparalleled skill, ability, leadership, all of that. And this dude has been accumulating so much power and subjugating so many people and continents, and just amassing more and more power for his rule, that it led these summoners to these extreme lengths. And now we get Krull, the sister of Cold Knights, and Draconis, who are showing up presumably to try and deal with them once and for all. This is a guy who's like reportedly even worse than a Jaghut tyrant, with up to 12 million people under his rule at this particular point in time, which is just absolutely gnarly.
Damn, it feels good to be a gangster.
Side note, and this seems kind of out of the blue, but he's also being trailed by this lone one-eyed wolf. You don't really know what's up with that now, but I just pointed out as something to maybe keep an eye on. And so after seeing all this destruction on Korbal, he goes over to Jakuruku, and there he sees again another continent that is completely in ruins. This time not from the fall, but him, Draconis, and Nightchill are all looking around and just reporting on horror and devastation everywhere. And so they all are there to converge on and deal with this warrior leader king, emperor, who we come to find out is the man himself, Calor. And he admits that although he never got Ardata, he did subjugate everyone else. He talks about the ones who summoned this fallen god to try and take him out as the Circle, and laughs about how they ended up taking themselves out. But it all boils down to the fact that he knows these elder gods have come to take him out, and even though the Circle was unsuccessful with their gambit on the summoning a foreign alien god, that the elder gods are going to come to do for him, and he's not the type to just go down swinging or to give up easy or to give up at all. And so instead of waiting for them to take him down, what he did was he burned the entire thing down. He murdered 12 million people. Damn! And you just get that moment where you can imagine like a zooming out scene of him on his throne sitting on a pile of bones, which are the bones of these millions of his own subjects that he took out so that these foreign gods couldn't come in and take him away from him. Whoo! And so Krull creates a whole entire warren at great personal cost to himself to basically sweep the remnants of Jacuruku, the entirety of this whole continent, all these dead millions and millions of people, animals, everything, all life, into this warren so that the land could start to try and heal itself. And then the three elder gods curse them, basically, to never die, but to never succeed at what his ultimate goals are, which is conquest and tyranny, and to never actually ascend. And so just this, plague to constantly persist on and on through centuries and get up there and then lose it all and start to rebuild and never be able to achieve godhood or anything like that. Calor, again, doesn't go out without a fight, though, right? Because he curses them back. He curses Krull to be forgotten. He curses Draconis to be taken out with an instrument of his own making. He curses the Sister of Cold Nights to be live in constant fear of betrayal, or at least with the knowledge that she will ultimately be betrayed and taken out. And I think the verbiage he uses is to be ripped apart by unhuman hands on a field of battle, and it's the Sister of Cold Nights who connects the dots that that's going to happen via betrayal.
Wow. That is brutal.
That basically wraps it up, and we close out with Draconis telling his fellow elder gods about this thing that he's creating. They talk, Draconis himself and Krull and Nightchill talk about how they might alter their plans over the long haul, in light of this curse that Calor has placed on the three of them. The Sister of Cold Night says she's not going to live in fear of being betrayed her whole life and is just going to carry on, and it is what it is. Draconis says he might make some adjustments, and then you kind of pan out, if you will, as the scene closes on this one-eyed wolf who's watching all of this stuff go down. And he basically goes off to resume his search for his lost mate that he hasn't seen in ages. Whew! So yeah. Talk about epicness of scope. This prologue was just super well written, super enjoyable. On a reread, you get a lot out of it, but just even, I remember the first time, just the epicness of scope. You're talking about the span of hundreds of thousands of years, these huge, catastrophic events in both halves, the 300,000 years ago part and the 120,000 years ago part, and it really just sets the stage for what is an amazing book. So we're going to leave the regular chapter stuff here. All of the first-time readers jump out. Thank you so much for watching. The rest of us are going to nerd out on the immense, juicy, spoilery goodness. Okay, and so diving right in, again, this one foreshadows a lot, folks. Calor, I never really fully appreciated until this third reread or fourth. I think this is the fourth reread on Memories of Ice. But Calor is the spark that starts it all, right? You know, if you think about the 10-book arc to the Crippled God, that wouldn't happen without Calor, without the thaumaturgs, the circle, calling down the Crippled God in order to take out Calor. Then you don't get, great ravens. You don't get the whole thing of the Crippled God, right? You don't get the chaining. You don't get the curses. You don't get like the Imperial Warren and the decimated Jakuruku, right? You don't, who knows what would have happened with Draconis and Nightchill if not for all of that stuff. So just hugely consequential person. If you had to put the whole series of books onto one person, he's kind of that one through line on it all, really, if you step back. The other thing in this prologue is just the poor Jaghut, right? Like, all they want to do is be left alone. They raise ice glaciers, they turn around and fight when they have to, but really they're just trying to isolate themselves, and they're trying to create these impassable barriers, and it's the Imass are totally us, right? That it's they had it's an ego-driven thing. Like, here we are, we're this race, see us, take us seriously. They want to, have a pissing contest against all these other races. They want to take the tape measures out, right? They want to be, again, it's all very egocentric, and look at the consequence. And it just never ends, right? And I think that's the other cool thing about this prologue is the scope of it, right? Is that you're seeing that this is very much a millennia upon millennia kind of story, a theme, an arc that's playing out that never resolves itself. And it's that like arrogance and self-importance and ego and stuff, and that makes it kind of never-ending, and is really at the root of all of their issues. Erickson just wrote an essay on Neanderthals and kind of that presupposition that they were stupid and had a lower level of intelligence, and it was a whole really interesting article about how his Imass were really what if it was just a precursor, an intelligent precursor to human, and exploring the themes of kind of how we get to where we are, and that ultimately kind of looking at them as intelligent and lenses to view ourselves with that same hubris and all of that stuff, and how that played out for them over hundreds of thousands of years, and maybe suggesting to us, how we could do some self-reflection on that front. And again, that's why I love these books, is because these themes are obviously fictional, fantasy-based, but they're really asking us to examine ourselves, both, individually, and also, our actions and ideas and stuff, and how they shape the course of time. And ultimately, it's, the futility aspect, and that theme that's here and in Gardens of the Moon and stuff, is that they're ultimately ending up, living lives without meaning, that they've, go through these rituals, that they do all this stuff to fight this war, and then you see them down the road, and what are they living for? It's only for the pursuit of that war. That's why I also think, like, the Ithkovian stuff in this book is so powerful too, right? Is because it's giving them that second chance to find meaning, right? To live for something else. And you see what Tool does, and goes out and tries to have a family now again, and focus on being in the moment, being in the here and now, being present. That's kind of why I'm on this big camping trip too. But and I think he's kind of, he being Erickson, is suggesting to us that we're living in our second chance right now, that we don't have to make those mistakes, that we can stop and think about what we're doing and be deliberate and thoughtful, and focus on what matters in life, and that this is our chance to see how that story plays out through his story, right? And to make cool choices for ourselves now. And it's just, again, that's why I love these books. He's asking us to be better people, in addition to just telling us a great story. And I think, if you go really deep and think about the meta nature of the book, and that this is a book written by Kamen'Zad to people of his own home world, presumably, which is us, right? To think about these kind of things and find lives that have meaning and purpose, and aren't just about getting that bigger TV and whatever, and the another Ferrari in the garage and all of that stuff. But again, finding that purpose. Just a classic case, again, I think, of what Erikson does best, which is to tear down that fourth wall and to really, again, ask us to step up as people and as individuals, too. Question for the pros in terms of spoilery stuff, too, is Krull at one point, I think, refers to himself as the last of the elders. Him, Draconis, and Nightchill. He says the last of the elders have come to confront Calor. Why, there's obviously a lot more elders, right? We got the Errant, we've got Kilimandaros, we've got a lot, Mael, Ardata, everybody, so I'm curious what your take is there. The last thing I'll bring up, just because we've gone on, it seems like forever here, just because I'm excited for Memories of Ice, is the Blood and Bone stuff, right? Is that really seems pretty obscure, like that Ice book. It's kind of like the Dust of Dreams, maybe, of the Ice novels, where it's kind of like, where did this come from, and who are these new people and stuff like that. But when you think about the whole book series arcing from, taking down Calor up through the end of the Crippled God, as Calor being that through line, then Blood and Bone makes a lot of sense, and actually it's a lot of fun to go back and explore, the origins of all of that storyline and backstory too. So last thing, was this the first mention of K'chain Shamal? Actually, probably not, right? They bring it up when they use the bone phone, but I think this is the first time as readers where we really start to engage with the K'chain. But I've gone on long enough. There's a lot of stuff to talk about, but we'll get into it in the next episodes where we dive deeper into Memories of Ice. As promised, here is your outro, which is the poem that opens up Book 1 of Memories of Ice. Thanks so much. Like, subscribe, and happy reading.
5 mages, an adjunct, countless imperial demons, and the debacle that was Darujistan all served to publicly justify the outlawry proclaimed by the Empress on Dujek One-Arm and his battered legions. That this freed One-Arm and his host to launch a new campaign, this time as an independent military force, to fashion his own unholy alliances, which were destined to result in a continuation of the dreadful sorcery enfilade on Genabacchus, is, one might argue, incidental. Granted, the countless victims of that devastating time might, should Hood grant them the privilege, voice an entirely different opinion. Perhaps the most poetic detail of what would come to be called the Panian Wars was in fact a precursor to the entire campaign. The casual, indifferent destruction of a lone stone bridge by the Jaghut tyrant on his ill-fated march to Darujistan.